Many people assume that building one of America's first public Wi Fi networks was primarily a wireless engineering challenge. It wasn't. The real challenge was creating a business model that allowed a new wireless technology to be adopted at scale. Now, today, wireless connectivity is everywhere. I'm using it right now. We use it in our homes, we use it in airports, hotels, coffee shops, libraries, all kinds of public spaces, and of course, our offices. And we don't even give it a second thought. But when I founded MobileStar in 1996, none of that existed. The internet was still new. There were no smartphones, and the standards that eventually became modern Wi-Fi had not yet been fully adopted. So when people thought about wireless communications in the mid-90s, they thought about, my cell phone. And when people were asked about the internet, most people, when I said, hey, what about connected to the internet? They were like, well, what's that? They didn't know, right? Yet those of us on the founding team of MobileStar, we believed something important was about to happen. And let me explain that. Portable computers were becoming more common. Business travelers increasingly need access to email or corporate databases and their company networks while they were away from the office. The technology existed to provide high-speed wireless data in public places. But what didn't exist was a business model. Now, our vision was really simple, and our marketing team worked hard to come up with this. You'll appreciate this. We would tell people, hey, MobileStar will be everywhere you sleep, eat, move, and meet. Sounds simple, right? We wanted to build a national wireless network serving business travelers in airports, airline clubs, hotels, conference centers, and of course, coffee shops. Now, looking back on this, the technology was actually the easy part. The real challenge was convincing venue owners to participate in a business that honestly did not yet exist. Think about it. Why would a hotel allow us to deploy our network in their lobby or their hotel rooms, right? Why would an airline provide access to its airport clubs or its terminals? Why would a coffee shop dedicate space and resources to service something that nobody's ever asked for before, right? There was no established market. There was no accepted pricing model, and this drove us crazy, right? Because we worked really hard. Are we going to charge by the byte? Who knows what a byte is, right? We're going to charge by the page. We had to work on building a pricing model. And there was no proof that travelers would actually pay for wireless internet access because nobody had ever done this before. So there wasn't like some market research we could look up and I could turn to my team and go, hey, tell me what the research says. There was no research. Every venue we talked to required a business case. And of course, every venue, the owner managers that we would enter into business with required a contract. Now, two of our earliest breakthroughs came when we secured deployment agreements with American Airlines and Hilton Hotels. It was a challenge to get them on board, but they had unique pain points. For instance, at American, I was dealing with the head of the Admiral Clubs, and one of the problems he told me that they had is that travelers would come into the Admiral Clubs and they would immediately look for, and I'm going to use a phrase most of you don't know, RJ11 jacks, right? These are phone jacks where you would plug in a landline phone, and they would look for those because they needed to plug in their modem from their laptop, right? At Hilton, the problem was actually a little bit different. At Hilton, there were so many people when they would check into their hotel rooms, they would unplug the phone, they would plug in their laptop, and they would tie up the hotel's PBX for hours. In fact, it would bring them down crashing. So Hilton's problem was they had so many business travelers trying to connect through landlines, they were having to do forklift upgrades of their PBXs, right? So negotiating and closing those two deals, that was key. And those two agreements that we had, the one with American and the one with Hilton, really gave us the credibility that we needed and demonstrated that major brands were willing to take a chance on this new idea. But signing those agreements was only part of the challenge. Of course, to build a national network like this, we needed capital. Lots of capital. Now, investors understood the promise of the technology, but they also understood the risk. We were building infrastructure before a market had fully emerged. Remember, there was no precedent for this. There was no other entity that investors could look at and say, okay, MobileStar is going to be like them, only bigger, like them, only national, like them. There wasn't that, right? And we needed enough network coverage to make the service valuable before we could even generate meaningful revenue. Imagine MobileStar was based in Dallas. Imagine if we'd done Dallas and New York. You'd go, okay, well, that's good. There's a lot of travelers that are flying American, as an example. There's like a milk run to LaGuardia, right? They could do that. But what if they flew to Cleveland or LA or San Francisco or Atlanta or Chicago or almost anywhere else? If we didn't have a footprint in those locations, why would they sign up for our service? So we really had to build a national footprint and a big one before people would say, okay, I'll sign up for a subscription. Now, fortunately, when we successfully raised our Series B financing and secured the capital necessary, we were able to continue to expand the network. But that deal that we closed with that Series B round with 3 venture capital companies was the key to unlocking what became our most important strategic partnership, and that was with Starbucks. Now, at the time, Starbucks operated approximately 3,500 coffee shops across the U.S. and was rapidly becoming a destination for business travelers and professionals. Go back and look at some of the rom-coms in the 90s and see how many scenes there are where somebody rushes into Starbucks, buys some coffee, and leaves. Starbucks was becoming a place to go to in the 90s, and we were going to ride that wave. Now, we believed that Starbucks could become the centerpiece of our national network. The challenge, of course, is that we had to convince Starbucks of this, and it took a while. In fact, it took about 6 months of interacting with their head of strategic planning and many, many other stakeholders in their organization to secure an agreement that would allow us to deploy our network in their 3,500 locations. Now, eventually, after about 6 months, it was in December of 2000, I found myself sitting across the table from Howard Schultz, Starbucks' founder and CEO. I'd read his books. I mean, the guy is a legend. He'd done an amazing job in creating, founding, and scaling Starbucks. So I sat down with Schultz and I explained our vision. I explained why we believe people would want wireless access while traveling and working away from the office. I explained how business travelers increasingly relied on email and remote access to company networks and why we believed that connectivity, wireless connectivity, would eventually become an expected service in public places. He listened carefully, and then he said something I've never forgotten. He said to me, Mark, honestly, I don't think anyone would stay longer in my coffee shops to connect to the internet for email or anything else. But hey, since you're paying for the network, let's see what happens. Indeed, we saw what happened. Now, looking back, that moment captures the uncertainty that surrounded the entire industry. Now, today, the idea seems, it's like brain dead obvious. But at the time, it wasn't obvious at all. Neither side, none of us knew with certainty what customers would actually do. We didn't know how quickly the market would develop. And neither side knew whether wireless internet access would become a convenience, a differentiator, or, as it is today, an essential service. But we were able to structure an agreement that aligned incentives and allowed both companies, MobileStar and Starbucks, to move forward despite that uncertainty. And that's often how innovation actually happens. Not because everybody agrees on the future. Listen, we all sit around and hope for a future, and we can scope one out. We can say, this is what we agree the future could look like, might look like, right? But we don't always know. And when you got to sign on the dotted line, when you got to sign an agreement, you need to leave a lot of room to allow the interests, the preferences, and the risk mitigation for both parties to be memorialized in that agreement. But because both parties found a way to allocate risk and align interest, we were able to move forward together. Now, the lessons from a MobileStar remain highly relevant to many of the matters that I work on today. Technology disputes are rarely just about the technology. In fact, often the technology may work exactly as intended. The real questions often involve things like commercialization, market adoption, strategic partnerships, which I talk about in some other videos on this site, competitive positioning, capital formation, and the business decisions companies make when bringing these new technologies to the market. Those decisions frequently determine whether a venture succeeds or fails, and they also become frequently the central issues in litigation. Having helped build one of America's first public Wi-Fi networks, negotiated strategic deployment agreements with companies like American, Hilton, and Starbucks, and participated in raising the capital necessary to scale that new communications platform. I understand both the technology and the business realities that ultimately determine commercial success. If these issues resonate with the matter that you're working on now, let's talk.